On the night of August 8, 2025, U.S. reconnaissance satellites detected unusual red dots moving along Russia's northern coast. The U.S. military was horrified to discover that these were multiple Iskander units being deployed, along with secret radar arrays that had suddenly come back to life after nearly a week of silence. Russia was once again plotting to harm the world's leading superpower. For the Pentagon, this was a declaration of war. Just minutes later, a secret operation was launched. The submarine USS Tennessee, an Ohio-class nuclear submarine carrying 250 Tomahawk missiles, capable of wiping out an entire medium-sized country, silently moved through the depths of the ocean. It was the nightmare of every defense system, and it was about to plunge Russia into the worst nightmare of this century. Within 48 minutes, all signals at Severomorsk vanished. 3 submarine bases were hit. The Svalbard radar was incinerated. A logistics center was shattered. And senior Russian commanders were forced to confront something they were utterly unprepared for: invisible warfare. The US didn't need to set foot on Russian soil to choke an entire fleet with a volley of Tomahawk missiles. If you want to know what really happens when 250 Tomahawks tear through the Arctic sky, and when a powerful fleet suddenly vanishes into the night, stay tuned until the end of this video. When the Tomahawks roared in the deep ocean. August 9th, 2025. More than 500 nautical miles from the Norwegian coast, inside the Ohio-class nuclear submarine USS Tennessee, the air was thick with tension. The blinking red lights on the control panel weren't a malfunction. They were the signal to prepare for launch. Each launch tube inside the 170-meter-long vessel was loaded with the world's most dangerous cruise missile, the Tomahawk Block 5. There was no doubt. America had chosen to tear through the silence with a true storm of steel. Days earlier, after a series of precise attacks by RQ-180 drones crippled the Russian Northern Fleet's logistics, US KH-11 reconnaissance satellites recorded unusual movements around Severomorsk. Columns of military transport vehicles reappeared, and long-range phased array radar, silent for nearly a week, suddenly activated. Iskander coastal missile forces were deployed to the coastline, aimed directly westward, not content with just a defensive posture. Russia also established a mobile communication network stretching from Gadjevo to Arkhangelsk. To commanders at the Pentagon, this meant one thing: Moscow was ready for a counteroffensive, and any delay would be paid for in blood. Washington needed no further justification. The US president, during an emergency meeting at 03:00 a.m. Eastern Time, approved Operation Iron Storm, a pre-planned operation that was now officially declassified. The plan was chillingly simple: launch 250 Tomahawk cruise missiles in 2 waves, divided among Ohio-class submarines, surface destroyers, and strategic bombers, to neutralize all Russian military bases in the Norwegian Sea region within 24 hours. The missiles would be launched from 3 directions, penetrating Russia's multi-layered defense system, with support from tactical UAVs, electronic warfare, and F-35 stealth fighters providing guidance. In Norfolk, the U.S. Second Fleet received a target map of 12 key locations: Severomorsk, the fleet's command center, Gadjevo, the primary nuclear submarine base, offshore radar arrays at Shredny, the Arkhangelsk logistics hub, and a newly and secretly deployed radar cluster near Teribirka, close to international waters. Each point was assigned a priority designation from Alpha to Lambda, with specific missile packages. Meanwhile, the submarines USS Tennessee and USS Florida lay hidden near Greenland, each carrying over 100 vertical launch tubes ready to unleash fury from the ocean depths. On the surface, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers like the USS Porter, USS Bainbridge, and USS Ross were ordered to advance into the Arctic-adjacent area, coordinating with Norwegian frigates to establish a launch corridor from the Norwegian to the Barents Sea. Each ship carried over 90 Tomahawks, programmed to fly low over the sea, using terrain-hugging trajectories to evade radar. B-52 and B-1B Lancer strategic bombers had also taken off from RAF Fairford, UK, carrying the remaining 50 missiles to ensure the attack could be flexibly redirected, even if detected early by Russia. To help the Tomahawks penetrate the S-400 and S-500 defense layers Russia had positioned along the coast, the US deployed a high-altitude protective layer. MQ-9 Reaper tactical UAVs flew in an outer formation, creating a system of virtual signals to confuse radar. RQ-180 drones were used as battlefield sensors to confirm real-time coordinates. And F-35 Lightning II fighters would follow to perform laser designation and destroy any missed interceptors. Simultaneously, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft would conduct long-range electronic suppression, completely blinding the radar walls Russia had erected on the Kola Peninsula. All of this was set up, not for a battle, but for a strategic deterrence campaign with a clear message: the US would not tolerate a prolonged conflict, and any base threatening its aircraft carriers or allies would be erased from the map. At 19:00 GMT, the entire command network for Operation Iron Storm was encrypted. On the deck of the USS Ross, the Aegis system reported armed green. In the Atlantic, the USS Tennessee silently awaited the final order. On the screen at NORAD, the flight paths for each missile were already mapped out, weaving through the Kibbeney mountain range and slipping through coastal fog. All that remained was the final confirmation signal. 23:55. A short ping sounded in the headset of the commander on the USS Florida. A sequence of codes appeared. Zulu Iris Falcon. It was the final command. No one spoke. Everyone understood the biggest battle in Northern Europe since the Cold War was about to begin. And 250 Tomahawks, the weapons that had once shattered Baghdad, crushed Syrian bases, and terrified enemies from Libya to Afghanistan, would now carry the fury of a superpower, heading straight for the icy seas where the Northern Fleet had once proudly stood as Russia's steel wall. A firestorm on the Norwegian Sea. Bajri on August 10, 2025. The Arctic sky was thick with cloud, and a faint moonlight cast a cold, mercury-like sheen on the Norwegian Sea. In the deep ocean, the USS Tennessee launched a continuous salvo from 8 vertical tubes. Nearby, the destroyer USS Arleigh Burke simultaneously fired. White smoke columns billowed into the night, and like a ribbon of deadly metal, 125 cruise missiles began to accelerate, terrain hugging and hurtling toward 3 pre-programmed strategic targets. The missile rain split into 3 main branches. The first branch, 40 Tomahawks, headed northeast toward the surveillance radar station on Svalbard, where Russia had secretly deployed a long-range radar system near Longyearbyen to control the Arctic. The second branch, 45 missiles, flew along the Norwegian coast toward the rugged, hilly area near Bodo, where the US believed Russia had embedded a mobile Iskander missile complex with the terrain mapping radar. The final branch, the remaining 40 missiles, sliced through the Barents Sea fog, targeting the secondary military port of Severodvinsk, which provided logistical support for fleet operations in Murmansk. The Russian air defense system wasn't surprised, but it wasn't able to react as quickly as it hoped. As early as 2350 US Navy EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, flying in international airspace, had activated their next-generation jammer, mid-band NGJ IMBI systems. High-intensity, variable-frequency RF beams began to temporarily blind long-range PISA and ASA radars, creating dozens of false signals. At the same time, MQ-9 Reaper drones transmitted fake radar signals from the opposite direction, causing Russian surveillance stations to fall into chaos, unable to determine the true direction of the attack. The Svalbard radar station was the first to be hit. Although the Voronezh M radar had a 6,000-kilometer range, the Tomahawks flew just over 30 meters above the sea, constantly changing direction, while the technicians on duty were still arguing about the jamming signals. 3 Tomahawks slammed into the technical area. 1 hit the generator room, the second penetrated the data center, and the third ignited a fire in the auxiliary fuel depot. Within 4 minutes, the entire radar system was powered down, and its Arctic scanning signal vanished from the defense grid. The missile base near Bodo, a complex and difficult-to-access location, reacted more strongly. The S-400 systems positioned along the hillsides began to fire as soon as the Tomahawk signals appeared on their screens, creating a barrage of interceptor missiles that looked like fireworks in the icy night. At an altitude of 200 meters, the 48 M6 and 9 M96 launchers fired, taking down some of the first wave, but the interception rate was only about 35%, largely because the new Tomahawks had an updated algorithm with non-linear flight paths that constantly shifted to evade the Russian radar's kill box. 30 Tomahawks still broke through the air defenses. 8 hit the wheeled radar vehicles hidden behind a line of trees. 12 completely destroyed the armored vehicle parking area for the missile systems. The rest caused explosions in the logistics perimeter, sparking a massive fire that lasted for over 2 hours. One of these fires spread to a fuel depot, creating an explosion that could be heard by residents 10 kilometers away. The third attack, targeting Severodvinsk, was protected by a complex air defense network, including surveillance radar, Panzer S-1 S-400 systems, and small-caliber anti-aircraft guns. But 10 minutes earlier, an RQ-180 Sentinel had flown over the area, capturing thermal data and transmitting it back. This allowed the Tomahawk's flight paths to be adjusted at the last minute, avoiding many direct interception points. The result, 24 missiles hit the ship berths, damaging 3 Grisha-class frigates. 6 others struck logistics warehouses containing naval supplies and components. The remaining 5 destroyed the Maritime Coordination Center. A secondary explosion in an auxiliary ammunition depot plunged the entire port area into a sea of fire for more than an hour. In the Severomorsk Command Center, General Dmitry Mikhailov, commander of the Northern Fleet, stared at the digital map in disbelief. Radar signals had disappeared. Information from Svalbard and Bodo was cut off, and reports from Severodvinsk spoke only of fire and casualties. He couldn't understand why the 3-layered defense had been so easily breached. But the electronics engineers understood the US didn't just use missiles, they used waves, decoys, and false signals to confuse every sensor layer, turning the air defense system into a hollow wall. By 0025, the attack was over. In less than half an hour, Russia had lost over 60% of its battlefield awareness in the Norwegian Sea, along with 3 crucial logistical positions. Although not completely destroyed, the Russian air defense units were forced to cease operations to assess the damage, meaning the sky would be far more open in the hours to come. In Moscow, an internal meeting at the National Defense Management Center was heavy with tension. A young security advisor stood up, his hand trembling as he held an analysis from a GLONASS satellite. He said just one sentence, but it rang out like a warning bell. "We have just been attacked by a force we were not prepared to fight against." The nightmare is not over yet. As the first light of the August dawn touched the Arctic's permafrost, Russia's invisible nightmare began to materialize from unknown bases in Iceland, Greenland, and even Alaska. 75 RQ-180 Sentinels took off, without sound, without signal, without any radar warning. They silently climbed into the lower stratosphere, a height in temperature where even satellites struggled to distinguish between a steel bird and a thick cloud. This time, the mission was completely different from the earlier Tomahawk strike. There was no indiscriminate barrage, no large-scale destruction. Instead, it was a precision strike to the last meter, completely neutralizing 3 main nuclear submarine bases, taking down the backup communications center, and disrupting the entire logistics chain for the Northern Fleet. Nearly 120 miles from Norwegian airspace, the RQ-180s flew at an altitude of over 60,000 feet, well above the reach of conventional ground radar. Here, they activated their synthetic aperture radar SAR systems, a sensor that can see through clouds, snow, forests, and concrete structures, using AI to analyze the reflected waves to identify targets. The data showed a position error of less than 2 meters, a 98% accuracy rate, even with the Arctic's dense cloud cover. The Gajievo nuclear submarine base, where most of the Asan and Borei-class submarines were stationed, became the priority target simultaneously. The RQ-180s moved closer to Olenya, the logistics coordination point for the submarine command system, and a telecommunications relay station outside Severomorsk, while most Russian forces were still dealing with the aftermath of the early morning Tomahawk attack. The second deadly strike, like a ghost, was already inbound. At exactly 05:32 Moscow time, 12 small-scale air-to-ground missiles were launched simultaneously from 6 Sentinels, aimed directly at the floating submarine berths in Gajievo. The first explosion tore through the fog, triggering a series of secondary blasts as fuel cells were hit and detonated like industrial bombs. A Yasin-class submarine, in the process of torpedo resupply, was completely tilted. Its stern section cracked. 2 crew members were incinerated in the technical center. 4 others went missing in a subsequent explosion in the navigation depot. At Olenya, The strategic satellite communication system was completely jammed by a wide-frequency broadcast and electronic black hole created by the Sentinels themselves. All
As it prepared
communication
for departure,
between the Northern Fleet and the General Staff was severed for 11
the Houthis
minutes.
declared the strike a war
11
crime
minutes of
and promised a
absolute
significant
silence, like a
response.
knife held to the
Their
throat
statement
of the
warned that
entire
the skies
Russian
over the
military
Middle
command
East would
system.
soon change,
By the
and
time
not in
Russia
Israel's
began to
favor.
react,
Reportedly
it was
carrying
too late.
Hajj pilgrims,
S-400
which, if
systems
enough
around
projectiles come at
Severomorsk
once,
fired into
some
the
will get
suspected
through.
airspace, but there was nothing there.
Yemen,
The 40
there is
N6
no
missiles
doubt.
flew up and then fell into the sea. By the time they realized
Struck by
the
a
attack
missile,
was coming from high altitude and a
Soldiers,
completely different
men, women,
horizontal
and elderly
axis.
pilgrims
8
were
other
killed in
missiles
seconds.
from the remaining
The region, not
Sentinels
just
had
because of the
already
loss of
slammed
life,
into
but because the
Gromyka
plane was
Communication
unarmed.
Center,
Questions with
destroying
no
the
answers.
main transmission tower and the auxiliary relay station.
In Yemen,
0604 at the Russian Ministry of Defense. The large screen went black. On the operational map, the entire Murmansk and Arkhangelsk region, the heart of the Northern Fleet, fell silent. A stifled sigh echoed through the meeting room, followed by complete silence. The aftermath of that 48-minute attack was a strategic disaster. 3 submarines were put out of action, 2 heavily damaged, 1 with its entire command compartment incinerated. The logistics base was non-operational, and all communication with Arctic vessels was completely cut off. In total, 36 officers were killed, 71 were injured, and 5 were missing. But most importantly, the Northern Fleet was now a body without a head. The U.S. Department of Defense issued a message that morning, stating this was a proactive defensive action to ensure the safety of U.S. forces in the North Atlantic. No civilian targets were attacked. The Pentagon emphasized that the U.S. did not seek full-scale conflict, but was prepared to respond at every level if national security is threatened. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, Secretary General Stoltenberg announced his support for the U.S. operation and called on Russia to de-escalate. However, inside the Russian Foreign Ministry, a heated debate erupted. One side wanted to retaliate with Kalibr cruise missiles. The other argued that escalation would mean confronting not just the U.S., but all of NATO, something they no longer had the capacity to sustain. In global analysis channels, the operation was likened to a new chapter in modern warfare. No rumbling tanks, no need to occupy land, just blinding, deafening, and hamstringing the opponent with waves, artificial intelligence, and stealth. The U.S. didn't need to enter Russian territory. It only needed to permanently cripple the entire Northern Command network. All of the above content is a simulation, a hypothetical, strategic, and analytical scenario. It is not intended to incite violence, political bias, or provoke military action or war. The content is for hypothetical and analytical purposes only. Any misinterpretations will not be accepted. We are not responsible for any understanding or application of the video's content. Viewers should critically evaluate, verify information, and consume content selectively. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end. If you are passionate about military affairs and enjoy analysis and hypothetical scenarios, please stay with our channel. If you found this video interesting, please click like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our daily updates. Now you can watch some of our latest and most popular videos currently on screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.